I believe you can see me too, huh?
Okay, so if you're ready, we can start. I would like to introduce, he doesn't need any introduction, but Ibrahim Kalin, he's a senior advisor to Turkish Prime Minister Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. As a broadly trained scholar of Islamic studies, he has taught a number of courses on Islamic history and culture at Georgetown University. His field of concentration is post-Avicanian Islamic philosophy with research interests in Ottoman intellectual history, interfaith relations, and comparative philosophy. He has contributed to several encyclopedias, including the Macmillan Encyclopedia of Philosophy, second edition, the Biographical Encyclopedia of Islamic Philosophy, and his book, Islam and the West, published in Turkish, won the 2007 Writers Association of Turkey Award for Best Book. And he has also co-authored a major study on Turkish perceptions of the West. So Ibrahim Bey, thank you for being with us, and we can start if you're ready. Thank you.
Thank you, Gönül. After this introduction, I feel like giving a paper on philosophy rather than foreign policy. But let me begin by congratulating the Middle East Institute, its director, Ambassador Wendy Chamberlain, and the Turkey director, Dr. Gönül Tol, for organizing this major conference on Turkey. I'm sorry I couldn't be there with you today in person because I had to cancel my trip to DC because of the recent events. But I'm happy to be able to connect with you thanks to modern technology through this video conference. I think it's fair to say that the expansion and new directions of Turkish foreign policy over the last decade have generated a lively debate among domestic and foreign policy circles, diplomats, analysts, academics, journalists, businessmen, and NGOs. The debate revolves around the transformation of Turkey's foreign policy agenda against the backdrop of the major shifts in regional and global power structures. Various questions, some well-informed, some rather rhetorical, are raised to assess Turkey's standing in global politics. Given the growing interdependencies of the world in which we live, it will be wise to define foreign policy not simply in terms of state policies and diplomatic relations, but rather in terms of a nation's overall attempt to position itself in the world system. The sum total of activities and initiatives which help a nation position itself in the global system gives us a broader definition of foreign policy. In this sense, foreign policy does not simply refer to state-to-state relations or diplomatic representation. Rather, it comprises a nation's political outlook, social capital, economic power, and military prowess. Furthermore, it is underlined by a nation's self-perception, sense of history, cultural identity, geostrategic location, population dynamics, societal traditions, economy, and other elements. In order to assess Turkey's foreign policy and its standing in the global order today, we need to pay attention to these larger issues that shape the thinking and practice of foreign policy. Like all countries, Turkey responds to developments, challenges, and opportunities in the global system against the backdrop of these elements and assets. A proper understanding of the transformation of Turkey's standing in the world order over the last decade requires an assessment of the major events that have redefined the boundaries of power, statehood, agency, and international relations in global politics. As I shall discuss shortly, this assessment is also needed to understand Turkey's position in regards to the Arab revolutions in general and the Syrian crisis in particular. With these points in mind, I will refer to four major ruptures that have shaken and reshaped the global world order over the last 3 decades. I have selected these four ruptures for their relevance for the ongoing evolution of the global order and their ramifications for regional balance of power. As I shall discuss shortly, Turkey has developed new mechanisms to deal with each fault line event and expanded its foreign policy outlook in the process. The first rupture that led to the reshaping of the international order was the end of the Cold War and the emergence of a new multipolar world system. The Cold War had its own conveniences, and its borderlines were more or less clearly drawn. As a member of NATO, Turkey belonged to the Euro-American bloc against the Eastern Soviet bloc. The end of the Cold War created new opportunity spaces, and Turkey quickly adapted itself to the new realities of a multipolar world. It embraced globalization and began to develop relations with various countries around the world, including the countries of the former Soviet bloc. Globalization in Turkey in the 1990s also meant moving in multiple directions and exploring different possibilities in diplomatic, social, and economic realms in both domestic politics and foreign policy. Internally, Turkey's embrace of multi-centered globalization led to a questioning of classical top-down modernization cum westernization and initiated a serious debate about Turkey's own identity on the one hand and the overcoming of Eurocentrism on the other. The second rupture after the end of the Cold War was the terrorist attacks of September 11th. The attack was a turning point at the very beginning of the 21st century and sent shockwaves around the world. The terrorists, believed to be irrational actors acting on instinct, designed the attacks in such a way as for them to be a spectacular event, in quotation marks. The horrifying image of two airplanes flying into the tallest buildings in New York like missiles, the awful collapse of the Twin Towers, the profound agony and helplessness of people were meant to challenge the US power on a global scale. We all watched it in horror. The fact that we all watched it in horror all over the world was a global postmodern moment. It was both real and unreal, terrible and spectacular, simple and sophisticated, local and global, past, present, and future all at once. It was clear from day one that nothing will ever be the same again, neither for those who carried out the terrorist attacks, nor for those who were targeted. The implications of 9/11 went well beyond the US and its war on terror. It changed the prevalent threat perceptions on a global scale and ushered in a new era of what some experts have called securitization. Turkey responded to the imbalance between security and freedom in the post-9/11 world by expanding the sphere of liberties and new opportunities both at home and in the region. Turkey introduced a number of democratic measures in the 2000s in regards to the country's judicial system, the Kurdish issue, non-Muslim minorities, Alawites, freedom of press, free political association, zero tolerance to torture, and fight against coup attempts. Turkey implemented these reforms also as part of the Copenhagen criteria in its attempt to become a full member of the European Union and established a healthy balance between freedom and security. It should be noted that these democratic measures were introduced despite the unremitting PKK terrorism and despite several coup attempts to overthrow the democratically elected government. The third major rupture that shook the international system was the global financial crisis, which began as a mortgage crisis in the US, quickly spread to Europe and became a Eurozone crisis. The crisis affected the global economy in many ways and forced governments to take new measures. Especially in Europe, it caused both an economic and political crisis, leading to the collapse of several governments with austerity measures introduced despite widespread popular protests. Being part of the euro economy, Turkey has been naturally affected by the financial crisis, but it has fared much better than many other countries. As a matter of fact, Turkish economy has continued to grow and remain the second fastest growing economy over the last several years. This economic success, combined with political stability and good governance, has been essential for Turkish foreign policy and enabled it to expand in multiple directions and gain depth in several key regions, including the Balkans and the Middle East, as well as in Africa. At a time when countries have reduced their diplomatic presence in Africa and other places because of the economic crisis, Turkey has expanded its embassies. For instance, in Africa alone, Turkey has opened close to 20 new embassies and consulates, bringing the total number of diplomatic missions to 32 by this year. A key component of this success is Turkey's ability to diversify its regional and global markets options in recent years. While Turkey has about still 45% of its foreign trade with European countries, it is developing strong trade relations with other countries and attracting investment from all over the world. The fourth and the last rupture that I will mention here is the Arab revolutions that began with the Jasmine Revolution in late 2010, became really important, visible in early 2011, and quickly spread to Egypt, Libya, Yemen, and Syria. A year and a half later, and despite some pessimism, the Arab world has already been transformed by the Arab revolutions. Dictators have been removed and people from all walks of life have claimed their political agency to create a socio-political order based on justice, equality, transparency, and accountability. The Arab revolutions have taken the world by surprise. We are witnessing here a dazzling shrinking of space and time, where the pace of history has accelerated and thrown all centers of power off balance. Regional and global powers are now readjusting themselves to this new reality. The Orientalist myths that Arabs and Muslims cannot rule themselves, that they are happy to live under authoritarian rules, that their religion and culture teach them nothing but submissive acceptance of oppression, and so on, have all been shattered. The frequently asked question whether the Arabs are ready for democracy has already been answered by those who have sacrificed their lives for freedom, dignity, and honor. The question is not whether Arabs are ready for democracy. They have already answered that question in the affirmative. The more relevant question is whether the West and the big powers of the world are ready for democracy in the Arab world. In other words, will outside powers that promulgate democracy around the world recognize the free choice of the people in Arab countries and work with elected governments on the basis of mutual respect and reciprocity? The way in which Europeans, Americans, Russians, Turks, and others will answer this question will shape the future relations between Arabs and Muslims on the one hand and the Western world on the other. This is not merely a rhetorical question. The old power structures in the countries in which the Arab revolutions have taken place still remain to be main obstacles to democracy, rule of law, and economic recovery. The danger is not Islamic or popular movements, as some claim, but the deep state structures that refuse to give up power to the people and their elected representatives. During this extraordinary historical moment, Turkey has chosen to be on the right side of history by standing with the Arab peoples in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya, Yemen, Syria, and elsewhere. We have never hesitated that the will of the people is more important and sacrosanct than the security of the state. We have never doubted that people's deep wisdom will give them the moral and political means to overcome oppression and injustice. Turkey has chosen a similar path in Syria, with which we had developed a special relationship since 2005. This relationship was nurtured on the principle of mutual interest and respect. It is also grounded in the deep historical, cultural, and human relationship that exists between Turkish and Syrian people. Turkey used its good relations with President Assad with the hope of convincing the regime to start a peaceful process of reform and change. The regime refused. Turkey then appealed to other countries and sought to use diplomatic channels to put pressure on the regime to stop killing people, attacking cities, arresting and torturing civilians. Again, to no avail. At the end, Turkey was forced to cut all diplomatic relations with Syria in September of last year, 2011, when the number of people the regime killed at the time had reached already over 3,000. The Arab League and UN initiatives have also been met with more violence from the regime. Despite its promises in April of this year, the Syrian regime still refuses to implement the 6-point Annan plan, hence the suspension of UN monitors' mission over the last 3 weeks. Let us also remember that over the last year, around 15,000 people have been killed in Syria. As of today, around 33,000 displaced Syrians have taken refuge in Turkey.